Let's start. Well, thanks again, Thibault, for accepting the challenge of participating at the IDC and letting us know what your project on Computational Antitrust Project is. Welcome everybody to the IDC also. As some of you might know, for all those who don't know what the IDC is a space in which we like to promote independent investigation on competition law and policy issues. It's open to everybody interested in these subjects, so please feel free to contact any of us and cooperate and participate in all our discussions that are not only workshops or conferences online, but we are also meeting not that much as we would like to, but also personally to discuss some issues related with competition law and policy. We do have, as we always say, an international advisory board that in a certain way is a sort of an equalizer on what we do and what we don't need to do here. We have some of them here, like Samuel Holmes, we also Philip Marston, and some others who have put their names down today to participate in our activity today. Since last year, we are also having a regional chapter throughout Latin America. We already have had some activities with the Chilean chapter, the Mexican chapter, the Argentinian chapter. So the idea is to spread the word in the region in Latin America and to share our own experience and discuss openly on all these issues related with competition and law and policy. Our keynote today is Thibault Schrepel. Maybe many of you know him. I'm gonna just give a very short bio of Thibault. He's a faculty associate at Stanford University Codex Center and an assistant professor at Utrecht University School of Law. He also holds a research and teaching positions at the University of Paris I and Sciences Po Paris, as well as a PhD in digital antitrust law. He's a Harvard University Bergman Center alumnus, and a couple of years ago, he was granted the Academic Excellence GCR Award, which recognizes an academic competition specialist who has made an outstanding contribution to competition policy. And he has also published a book, and he's always writing and very actively writing articles on Harvard University, MIT, Oxford, NYU, Berkeley, Georgetown, among others. The subject, what we are discussing today is, as we said, a new project that was launched in January this year, the Computational Antitrust Project. And all those who have been participating at the IDC's activities, we have had some previous activities related with these issues. But honestly, I think there has been very passionate discussions on practices implemented in the digital economy. But the use of these technological tools to address them is honestly very little debated. So I think the Computational Antitrust Project, unless people think otherwise, I think this project really helps a lot to boost this discussion among agencies and also between the companies and all the players in the markets. So, I mean, the implementation of these methods, of these tools, can definitely contribute to improve antitrust agencies' abilities to detect, analyze, and remedy anti-competitive practices. But not only practices, but also it could be very helpful to simplify merger control proceedings. And on the other hand, it obviously can provide companies with those tools to assess and ensure that those compliance programs are definitely put in place on antitrust laws issues. Just one more comment. I have been a commissioner at the CNDC, the Competition Commission of Argentina, and I remember in 2017 or 2018, we had a meeting at the CMA where we signed an agreement to apply to apply a software that was supposed to be applied for bid rigging purposes mainly. For whatever reason, that didn't see the light. But I mean, the CMA has been very active on promoting these types of tools as an agency. Something similar happened to the ACCC in Australia and some other jurisdictions. Initially, Brazil with the BRAIN project, some authorities are very active on this. And I think that the Computational Antitrust Project could maybe help to boost, again, this discussion among agencies and to see these tools finally in the reality on an ongoing basis on the work of an authority. Not only the CNDC in Argentina, also, now that I'm talking from Argentina, we have in the city of Buenos Aires, there's a Prometea, which is a sort of a software that helps the city of Buenos Aires government and maybe administrative files that are being decided mainly through algorithms, artificial intelligence, and helping a lot that those repeated, sometimes bureaucratic paperwork may be done more agile, and also help to resolve more than 90% of those minor cases, which sometimes are is repeated information. Well, so the idea, as we said, we are recording, so this is going live, and we are also recording. Thibault will make a presentation of around 20 to 25 minutes, and we will follow with a Q&A sessions as we usually do. We can definitely have the questions live, all those who want, or you can share your comments or questions through the Q&A box down below Zoom. So Thibault, again, thanks very much for joining us, and the room is yours.
Yes, thanks a lot, and for the very kind introduction. I was thinking, so the name you say is Prometea, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking that's a fabulous name. Maybe it would have been a good name for the project as well. Although I will discuss that, but I think we have some limits we need to consider when it comes to computational law, and Prometheus and Prometea potentially is a bit too upfront, but that's something for the discussion. And so indeed, the plan is that I will discuss what I think computational antitrust can achieve and cannot achieve for 20 minutes. And I'm very happy that we have more time for the discussion than the presentation, because I do have questions for you, and I'm very much looking forward to your comments. And I cannot share my screen because I'm just a participant. So, but it should be, yes, it's working perfect. So should you be able to see my screen right now? This would be great. Okay, it works. So I thought I will be very basic and explain what, again, I mean by computational antitrust in 3 different ways. Why do we need it? How? So how to implement computational antitrust, and when can we do that? Is it something that we should keep in mind for in 10 years, 20 years, or is it something that we should be doing yesterday? So those are the 3 questions that I will try my best to, not really to answer, but to give a few perspective on it. So as for the first, you may be familiar with definitely the one on the right. The one in the middle, potentially you are. The one on the left, you know the name, but probably not the person. As you can see, it's not a picture, but it comes from there. The one on the left is Leibniz, and he wrote something quite some time ago, as you can see, in which he concludes that if you have the right tools, then the controversies are to arise could simply be calculated. And so this was the dream. And to some degree, you could say that Napoleon in France tried to achieve that dream by creating a code. But of course, as we know, the code is very thick, and we have lots of codes in France. But it's not enough, and you still have to go to court, because sometimes a situation may occur which is not actually already mentioned in the code. But that's the idea. And from that, a bit later, we had Holmes, who wrote that studying the law was necessary for a lawyer, of course, but that in the future will be necessary for a lawyer to also master economic theory. And I believe that the same can be said today for computer science, although I'm not arguing that lawyers should become computer scientists, but they do, in my view, have to train, and I'm more than happy to discuss that during the Q&A on how to do that, to be able at least to understand and dialogue with computer scientists. And so that's the overall idea of the project, to put computer scientists and lawyers together. And of course, you know, Richard Posner, and already 20 years ago, he wrote that the #1 issue when it comes to the digital economy will be the issue of time, speed, because the market and the technology goes very fast. And for the law, it actually is much slower for good reasons, but it is slower. So that's the idea. But I think that to some degree, what Posner is saying and the dream of Leibniz are actually coming in sort of a confrontation with one another. And we see that when it comes to the detection of anti-competitive practices. So we do have a few studies. I mentioned the name here on the screen. And so the estimation is that the annual probability that a cartel will be detected, if it is one day detected, is between 13 and 17%, which means that we actually detect way less than that, meaning that it is safe to say that if you infringe competition law, chances are that you will be fine. This will never be seen. Or if it is seen, the agency will decide not to go after you. And to some degree, you could say, well, it's okay if it's a matter of 1 to 2%, but a matter of 90% is probably a bit too much. And that, I believe, is about to increase exponentially. And indeed, if you look at the data and the projection, so it might be wrong, but this is to give you an idea. 3 years ago, we produced 33 zettabytes. So what is zettabyte? Well, it's here. A zettabyte equals 1 trillion gigabytes. So we can say it's a lot. So, but this was 3 years ago. In 4 years, we'll be producing 175 zettabytes. And as you can see, in 2035, we'll be producing over 2,000 zettabytes. So the number of the amount of data produced all over the world is exploding. And that, of course, is creating an issue if you do not have the right tool. If you do, then it's probably great news, because more data, then you could probably analyze data and detect stuff. But if you don't have the right tools, then you will be lost, and it will become nearly impossible to analyze all of the data with the human brain. So that's and I suspect this is not controversial, but that's the state, and that's the projection for the future. And already today we can see that agencies tend, when they go after companies for anti-competitive practices, they tend to do it in a retroactive way, a reactive way, sorry. So they generally, in the case of cartel, wait for leniency applicants. And that is true for over 80% of all cases in Europe, according to the OECD, and 90% in the United States. So to some degree, you could say, well, yes, it's, you know what, it's good enough. I believe that because of all the technologies, we're probably going to see less and less leniency applications. This is already the case. It is declining for the last 10 years. And so to some degree, we may want to be more proactive. What we also see at the same time is that merger control is representing more and more of agencies' activities. And we have many reports, but actually not even reading the reports, the agencies will complain about that. I've been talking in the context of this project with very small agencies, and they basically told me, you know what, we will never say it, but all we can do is merger control, because we have only a few employees and we don't have the resources to go after anti-competitive practices. But the same is more or less true for in Europe. You see the number of cases is declining, same in the US and so on. So that's for the detection part. And I believe we also have an issue when it comes to after the detection, when it comes to the analysis of potential anti-competitive practices. The first relates to the quantity. Indeed, let us say that you detect or you suspect a practice. If you, let us say, do a done rate and you size the company documents and you have 2 million documents, what do you do? If you do not have the right tools, it might be problematic. In the case of the Google Shopping, the European Commission said that they had to analyze almost 2 billion search queries. So obviously you would need some tools there. But the same is true also if you try to be very proactive. And the CMA, because the CMA has the power, and that's something which we need to discuss, but was able to go to Bing and Google and to say, hey, I want access to your search queries for just 1 week, meaning that they eventually got access to between 3 and 4 billion search queries. And obviously you also need some tools to analyze all that and find the needle in the stake of all of those queries. So that's for the quantity. And we also, I believe, have an issue when it comes to the nature of what we are trying to detect. Of course, we are, as lawyers, trying to detect infringement to the law, but this, as we know, can be informed in many ways. It could be economic theory. We've been doing that for 30 years, so we know how to do that, or at least we think we do. But when it comes to computer science, but also using behavioral insights, all of that is really hard for a human brain, again, to have the expertise to do all of that at the same time. So this is the state of where we are right now. Overall, what we do is very static. We take pictures of the markets, we look at the picture, and we try to understand the movie out of the picture, which is working, but also is limited to some degree. So I believe we have two solutions. We could say, well, we're going to give up. So if we give up, we actually have two sub-solutions. We could say, well, you know what? The market will work just fine. And to some degree, yes, you can make the point when it comes to monopoly, for instance, that they will disappear eventually, but that eventually might be in 40 years. So is that okay if there is an infringement of competition law for 40 years? Potentially, some people will say yes. So that's one solution. Another solution is ex ante regulation, where you say, well, let us not wait for practices to be implemented, therefore detected and analyzed. Let us just prohibit practices. Of course, if you do that, you do not solve the issue when companies do infringe ex ante regulation, how you detect those regulations. So it's a bit of a no-go. But potentially you could get rid of many practices doing it this way, which is the approach chosen at least when it comes to the DMA, but the European Commission is also active in computational antitrust, so it's a bit more complex, but this could be a solution. The other solution is that we don't give up and that we do computational antitrust. And of course, I'm biased, so I put George Costanza on the screen to try to convince you that I'm not the only one, but hopefully some of you will agree with me. That's where we need to go. So now the question is, okay, let us say that computational antitrust is a good idea, and I was doubting that because when the story is that when I joined the Codex Center at Stanford, which is known for computational law, they expressed some interest in creating a project, and I thought, well, let me see if we have something, merging computational law and antitrust, and I really found zero paper discussing the issues for the entire paper. A few here and there, but that was it. And of course, if nothing is out there or almost nothing, why would it be a good idea? And that took me quite some time before I got in touch with competition agencies. And when I saw the interest, I thought, well, potentially it's something we want to explore. I'm still not sure if it's a great idea, but at least it seems to me that we want to explore. And the question is, how can we do that? Because indeed, there are many ways. So if we indeed agree that antitrust without computer science is Sherlock without Watson, the question is, sure, but which Watsons do we need? Because it doesn't mean anything really. I mean, computer science is so many things at the same time, and it is also exploding, and you see many applications coming out on a daily basis. So where do we go and what do we do? And so that's what I want to explain now. And here I will make a distinction between anti-competitive practices, which is number one, to merger control, what can we do? And third, competition policies. And I believe that the tools are different and also the limits are potentially different. When it comes to anti-competitive behaviors, I try to explain that detection is indeed already an issue and it's about to become an increasingly important issue. And so you can make the point that potentially you could use computational tools, being a method, a computer methods to solve a problem, to screen the markets, and therefore be able to detect more anti-competitive behaviors. So there again, I know depending on the country, and I have no idea how it is in Argentina, but there are some limits, and you cannot, even as the agency, scrap the entire web, even on a legal basis. But still, if you were to do that and to some degree survey the price of a particular product over time, over different shopping websites, you could detect cartel or other types of behaviors. Of course, there are some limits. Potentially, you could say that tying is detectable because it's public information, When it comes to predatory pricing, it's not public information. The information you have out there is not enough to know if it is above the average total cost and so on. So it's not perfect, but it works for at least some practices. And something else that we could do here is to use natural language processing or understanding to indeed analyze the document of a company. And we do have some tools out there already where you could give millions of documents and actually try to see if there is an anti-competitive practice hidden in all of those documents. The FTC is doing it already, but I will come back to that idea. So that's for the detection. Again, there are some limits, but also a great potential here, I believe. And when it comes to the analysis, well, you could compare those millions of documents. You could use also more data. I think we can agree that competition agencies try to cooperate, and they do have the ICN and the OECD. But when it comes to sharing the data, we could do much more. So potentially computational tools could help do that. But also when it comes to the agencies within the same country. And we do have some papers, but just a few, trying to see how we could use financial statements to analyze whether or not there are anti-competitive behaviors. And that's something that we can probably do, knowing that financial authority already have lots of data that could be helpful to competition agencies. So that's one. And so in a sense, it is going out there and finding the information. Something else to be considered is also to work on the basis of the case law of an agency. And that's actually the theme of one of the papers that we published so far, where they actually train a machine learning algorithm, both supervised and unsupervised. And I'm more than happy to come back on the distinction on the basis of the FTC rulings. And out of that, detected that in the pharmaceutical market, for instance, when companies implement this type of practice, they also tend to implement another type of anti-competitive behavior. So this is information that could be highly valuable to agencies, and again, invisible to the human eyes. So that's anti-competitive behaviors. 2 mergers, and here, of course, the detectability issue, unless there is a gun jumping, but generally speaking, it is not so problematic. But the problem is that agencies, as we know, they have to take a decision no matter what, and the time they have is actually very limited. So when it comes to the procedure, and my instinct is that computational antitrust will actually start there, because when it comes to defining whether a merger or acquisition or joint venture should be notified, this could be very easily computed, meaning that if you put the number, you could basically get to the solution. Same is true to a lesser degree, but when it comes to the competitive analysis and the SNP test and all the tests could be easily computed. So that's one. Meaning also that you could potentially use the tools to analyze more documents. The European Commission said that in Bayer, Monsanto, they had to analyze almost 3 million documents. So here again, you may want to use those tools to analyze more and also to change the type of analysis. This, I believe, will be something we'll be discussing in the future, but we know that so far, we basically consider substitutable products. We do say that non-substitutable products are important, but how could you put that into the competitive analysis? It's really hard. And even more if it's about products which are totally outside of the market, totally different, such as AI application, which may compete with non-AI product. So it might be that thanks to the tools, we can actually define the market in a way which is a bit more precise. And something also which I believe might be where we may want to start is the asymmetry of information. And I believe we have 2 when it comes to merger control. The first is that companies choose the data they want to send to the agency. And in practice, I've seen that. And I believe this is not because of the client we had in the firm, but when it comes to guessing what's the market share of your competitors, of course, you would do a bit like, I guess it must be around 30% or something which is convenient to you. So here we could potentially do better if all of the companies were to share some information with agencies. Agencies could calculate the market shares a bit easier. And potentially you also may want to make the point that blockchain could help. And indeed, we've seen in the WhatsApp decision, but we have other cases all over the world that agencies complain that companies, when sending the data, will actually just send part of the data, or will get rid of certain information out of the database because it is not, in the company's interest. If market shares and turnovers were to be recorded on a private blockchain, only accessible to the company, they could actually send that to the agency. And if the company was to try to delete some information, this will be visible. So I believe this could actually solve quite a few issues. And the other asymmetry is that once the agency will treat the data, it will never go back to the company, or at least not the full data set, which makes it very hard for companies to come up with the great remedies to address the potential issues. So again, here, blockchain, I believe, could help, and smart contract also, but that's potentially a different issue. And the third is the one of policies. So here, I guess the consensus, and I hope that the consensus will be that competition agencies could do more when it comes to understanding their own practice. But of course, as we've seen, they already struggle to detect anti-competitive behaviors because they don't have the resources. So I understand fully why competition agencies wouldn't spend their scarce resources in doing retrospective analysis. And yet this could be very precious, as I showed you with the paper we published on which they train a machine learning based on previous case law. So it could be one way, to track the effectiveness of remedies and to see whether some remedies are fixing market issues or not. Potentially, we could do the same with legislation. Why not creating adaptive legislations, something which is not future-proof, meaning it's not a legislation that we take and will apply for 10 years, but a legislation that will evolve with the markets. And when it comes to understanding certain industries, such as why is the market untipping, this could also be helpful to use some of those tools. However, but that's very personal. When it comes to the prediction part, I'm more hesitant, to say the least. I believe it will be a mistake to believe that you can actually compute the entire world and get to the perfect solution, the perfect remedies to be imposed in that case, because there are always, the black swan hypotheses and events that were impossible to be computed in the first place. That being said, yes, you could automate the remedies using smart contracts, simulate probably the effect of mergers in a way which is a bit more precise. And that's the model, the agent model experiments. I've put 2 here on the screen, and the link, this is a course if you want to learn about it. It's fascinating. The very basic idea is that you will create subjects. It could be millions of them, and will assign certain characteristics to each subject. So meaning that the idea of the average consumer is gone, because you could have 10 million different consumers with 10 million different characteristics. And then you play a simulation and you see where they are going. And that could be something which could help when it comes to designing policies, but also merger control. And again, I've put the link here, and I'm happy to share the link and the presentation. So this is for the how. Of course, this is just an overview, and there are other possibilities. But I guess the question for now is, when should we do that? Because I've been mentioning quite a few technologies which exist, but also some technologies that could be developed in the future. But still, I believe that we could start now. And indeed, we can calculate part of competition law, not all of it. And to some degree, it may be impossible to calculate all of it, but part of it actually can be calculated, especially when it comes to merger control, for instance. So we have a few examples. As you mentioned already, Pablo, the CMA, I think it's fair to say that as of today is the leader in the field. I believe they have a team of about 50 people, computer scientists and data scientists. The Dutch Competition Agency has about 20 computer scientists. The European Commission has a DG Digit working on such developments. The FTC is using a tool called Relativity, which is NLP, a natural language processing, in which they provide millions of documents and would say, well, you should detect cartels. Of course, companies will almost never say, let's do a cartel, although sometimes they do, but they actually train the machine learning so that it will detect cartel, finding the right keywords and trying to understand the intention behind documents. And the DOJ went to the MIT to understand blockchain and machine learning, so it's also coming. But I think it's fair to say that more is to come. So this is the list of all of the agencies which are part of the Computational Antitrust Project at Stanford University. So as you can see, it's quite a few agencies, in fact, 54. And I hope that the number will keep on growing. And we have big agencies and small agencies, and a discussion with almost all of them. And I'll be more than happy to discuss what I perceive to be the issues, which are sometimes related, but sometimes also different, depending on the size of the agency, of course. What we do in a very concrete manner is that we have this website, and we published one academic article every month. It is purely academic. There is no money involved, whether public or private, and it will never be. So there is no conflict of interest. We actually published our third article this morning, which is open access. A few days after we publish each article, we do also publish a podcast. So the one for this paper will be published on Friday. And we also have all of those agencies, and very luckily, and we are very grateful for that, they have agreed to appoint one person to be the point of contact, and that person will take part in the annual workshop that we'll organize in December. And then if they have something to say, we'll actually send a short document saying those are all of the implementations we've been doing this year of computational tools. And all of that will be made public, open access in our annual report. So that's in a very practical way. This is an overview of the 3 papers that we've been publishing. We have more papers coming for the month ahead of us, coming from the MIT and computer scientists, but also competition scholars. So this, at least for me, is very exciting. I want to conclude talking about the challenges, because I don't want to give the impression that computational antitrust will solve it all and it's just a matter of calculating competition law. I think the number one challenge is to define the fields that you can compute. It might be fairly easy when it comes to mergers, when it comes to pricing strategies, because you could calculate all that. However, when it comes to certain more qualitative practices, it's hard. What is as efficient competitor? Is it only a competitor that can produce at a cheap price, or is it a competitor with a better product? How do you compute the quality of product? So the fields are very important, and for some of them, it will be nearly impossible to compute. The tools is also another one. Which tools and who should be developing the tools? Is it each agency, all of the agencies together, the academic world, private firms? How do we share the data? And once we have the tool, how do we feed the tools with the right data, which means to have the expertise. And I'm very happy to see that many agencies are, for now, recruiting actually computer scientists to feed the tools. But those are the issues that we want to discuss, and how to integrate computer scientists within the decision-making process. Challenge number 3, the role. This is coming from a paper from George Akerlof, an economist, but the same is true, I believe, when it comes to computational antitrust. He wrote last year that there are important topics which are very difficult to approach in the hard way, which is to do mathematics modeling out of those problems. And it will be a mistake, in my view, to say, let us just compute what we can and forget about the rest, because if it cannot be computed, it's not important. This is not true at all. And we're going to have to discuss eventually, what do we do in a situation where we have computed some elements, but we also have some other elements which are non-computable? Which one should take over the other? This will be something for the agencies and the academic world to figure it out. And the last one is to know the limits. As I said, for now, the idea of creating a theory of everything is far from being accessible. Potentially one day you can make the point that with quantum computing, we can approach that. There is a nice TV show about that if you want me to give you the reference. But for now, we are very far from that. So it's very important to be very cautious in applying those tools. That being said, it doesn't mean, in my view, again, that we should not actually try to put more data on the table, better tools, and consider the limits always, including when it comes to procedural fairness and other fundamental rights. In the end, and I will conclude on this one, I think at least what I see is that we do have the substance, which is we talk a lot about how big tech especially may infringe competition law, and for good reasons. The methods, however, are not very much in line with the new world, and we do lots of human brainstorming, which is great to some degree, but potentially we could actually match the two and make sure that the substance and the method actually match with one another, which is in a sense fighting fire with fire. And I'm afraid that if we do not do that, we are left with the two solutions that I mentioned at the very beginning, which are not, in my view, satisfactory. That being said, again, thank you very much for the invitation. You can access our websites. Everything is open access. I've put the link to the podcast, Twitter, email, but I'm very delighted that we have 20 minutes for the discussion. So looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thibault, for a very clear and short presentation. I think there's much to discuss and to explore further. We already have some comments or some questions on the chat. Some are public, some are sent to me individually. But one of the main concerns or challenges I find for the agencies sometimes is the interaction they need to have sometimes with other types of public organizations, for example, let's say, I don't know, hospitals or ministries or at a national, provincial, municipal level. That was one of the main problems we had when we were discussing this preliminary at the Commission, I remember, how to approach, for example, the Ministry of Health if we wanted to put this tiny software on their public bids. There were some let's say, doubts on what we were going to do, what we needed to do. They would not open sometimes the space for us to get into their systems and get that information. How do you have any reaction to this, or have you seen any development on these issues on your experience?
So I've been discussing that with a few agencies, and it seems that the experience is actually common over those agencies. What they experience is that they created a team of computer scientists thinking, oh, it would be wonderful and everyone's going to welcome them, very warmly. And this wasn't the case at all. And so for a few months, they actually were developing some tools which could be very helpful. But the rest, the case handlers, were actually refusing to work with computer scientists, thinking, you're probably a very nice person, but what you do is so complex that, it's already enough on my plate. So I don't want to hear about machine learning and all that. But still, for some of those agencies, they convinced them to actually just have a look at the software, and they were training the case handlers. And now they are apparently experiencing the other problem, which is that case handlers think that they can solve it all just using the right tool, which is also, the other extreme. But so in the case that you are mentioning, I guess it will be some political will to try to say, hey, let me just show you that, it could actually benefit your agency if I actually detect bid ringing when it comes to health, market and all that. But that is more potentially for political scientists to, create the first spark. But then I'm not too worried, at least in what I've seen, within the agencies. It seems to me that the number one issue will be more making sure that they understand the limits, and that, it's very important to use the tools and develop them in the right way, rather than the opposite.
Great, yes. And then I have another question on multi-jurisdictional issues, but let's give the room to other more interesting people. Like, for example, Judge Holmes, Simon, you have a question related with the previous question. Maybe you want to make it yourself.
Yes, no, happy to. Thanks, Thibault. I thought it was very interesting. And before I come to my comment, which might appear negative and is not meant to be, I do agree that we have to use all the tools available to handle the vast amount of data that we face, whether you're in a competition authority, in a company, or indeed in the court. My sort of nervousness, I think, is that we've seen this in other areas in the past. For example, when computers first came along, that vastly increased the amount of information that the authorities asked for. It vastly increased the amount of information the companies provided to the authorities. So we never actually succeeded in speeding things up. Query whether we succeeded in improving the quality of the analysis. That's a much more subjective thing. And I think I also saw it when, for very good reasons, which I very much supported at the time, we tried to introduce more economic analysis into competition analysis. Teams of economists were brought on board, and everything gets more complicated. There's a greater demand for information. Therefore, you need more economists and you need more computing power and so forth. And I don't know how we'll ever get ahead of ourselves. And if I wanted to make a slightly cynical comment, I was intrigued that the CMA is seen as the market leader with some 50 people in this area. And yet one of the most common criticisms of the CMA is that they're bringing so many fewer cases than other jurisdictions. And one sometimes wonder whether they're so busy doing fancy things behind the scenes, they're not actually getting on and bringing the cases. So there's just a few thoughts there. I'm supportive of what you're saying, and I just don't know how we stop things just spiraling out of control.
So, yeah, thank you very much. And, I've been thinking quite a lot about that because obviously, and I've been trying to think, considering how hard it has been for lawyers to accept economists, who's going to act, potentially be more skeptical when it comes to saying, yes, we do need computer scientists in the dance. I'm not sure if lawyers or economists will be pushing them away. I've heard a bit about both for different reasons so far. But indeed, I think we're going to see some pushback, especially if, in one particular case, the fact that you can actually use the tools to get to an analysis which is closer to reality is bad for your client or for the agency. So we're going to see some pushback. And again, I believe is more potentially for political scientists to try to solve and try to convince that we should be using these tools. But at the end of the day, what we see already is that there are more and more data. Agencies are too reactive. And I think it's fair to say that we're going to see a decline in the number of cases. This is already happening for the European Commission. All they can do now is merger control pretty much, and a few big cases here and there. So I hope that organically they're going to see that, the need for those tools to be developed. And to be fair for the CMA, I wasn't aware that people were saying that they do not bring enough cases, but they are, all that is very new.
Well, they take about, even their ambition is only to take, and somebody on the call will correct me, probably Philip Marsden, their ambition is only to take half a dozen or 10 antitrust cases or something of that sort. It's a very low number. It's extraordinary when you think of the number of people and the amount of very sophisticated resources they have.
Yeah, and I've read the op-ed published recently on the type of cases they were bringing. But I mean, to be fair, all that and the team is very much new. I believe they had half of the people last year and only 3 or 4 2 years ago. So I'm not sure there is a link between the two. But it seems to me that they're going to have no choice but to accept using those tools. Otherwise, they should. But sure, we're going to see some pushback, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the head of agencies are dealing with that. But yes, I share your concern very much, actually.
If my comment, appears to be levied at data scientists or economists, it's equally levied at lawyers. This whole business of things getting more complex. Lawyers are responsible for that just as much, including, of course, the courts. And
I suspect, and of course I'm biased because I'm also teaching in the law school, but I suspect that if we do not train lawyers to know how to speak with computer scientists, we're going to see the issue more and more. Because when it comes to machine learning, of course, it's very complex to be able to program a algorithm working on a basis of machine learning, but to actually understand it and understand what computer scientists are doing is just a matter of, a couple dozens of hours. And that you could do at the bachelor level. And I believe that then the issue of saying, well, it's too complex, I don't understand, will be solved, at least partially. But I know there are only just a few law schools all over the world training lawyers to understand computer scientists. And by the way, vice versa also will be very interesting. But we're going to have to start there. Otherwise, indeed, I see where we are heading, and potentially it will be quite ugly in some cases, I suspect.
Thank you.
Following this last comment, people, there's a question from Olga Mutis from La Superintendencia in Colombia. She actually was asking, how could an antitrust lawyer be trained in computational antitrust? Which experts or where could we access information to be updated?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about that this past couple of days, and I think I'm gonna try my best to come up with a list and publish that, and to say, you are a lawyer, you want to understand computer science, here's where you should go. So I want to reach out also to my friends working in computer science, but I'm finishing right now a course which is free on edX. It's called CS50, which is the name of the mythical course in computer science at Harvard. It's called Computer Science for Lawyers. And this, in my view, is quite fantastic. There is another one on Coursera called Machine Learning, provided by Stanford University and the MIT also. And those two are great because you have to watch a lecture and then you have to practice, and they will actually grade, the assignments and all that. The MIT also, MIT Computational Law Report is doing a course which is freely accessible online. So those are some of the resources, but that's where I would start. And it could actually get you pretty far in just a few hours, where you will be able to design a game and understand what's a loop and how it works and how the data structures, which might be enough to some degree to actually understand computer scientists and work with them. So that's where we start. But again, this is something I will be working on in the coming days, and try to put a list for everyone.
Yeah, I think sometimes we think this is too complicated, so we don't get into it. But if you read, for example, the paper you mentioned from your project of Mazarotto and Ito,
yeah.
They already said, I mean, that is not maybe the complicated side of things. And there's also a discussion on multi-jurisdictional application of these tools. Obviously, each country has its own law of competition, so they might differ in certain aspects. So there might not be one solution for everybody. But if you get into these technicalities, sometimes data is maybe the most important asset, and not necessarily that computational tools.
And if I may, and probably some of my computer scientist friends are not going to be happy, and hopefully potentially would disagree, but when it comes to unsupervised machine learning, what you basically do is that you give the input, which is the data, and you say to the computer, you find the output. So you find a way to classify the data in a certain way in different clusters. And you might want to say, I want 3 clusters, I want 10, 15. And of course, if every time you change the number of clusters, it will rank the data in different ways. And at the end of the day, the number of clusters that you would choose is actually a decision for lawyers and competition agencies, and it's something which is very much subjective. So it might be that 3 clusters will show cases coming up this way, or 10 clusters will be a bit different. But at the end of the day, what I wanted to say is that the way by which the machine will define the clusters is actually quite unknown to the human brain, and that's why it has been called a black box, which also creates lots of issues. But what I want to say is that we should not be under the impression that even the most skilled computer scientists will understand everything that a deep learning system is doing from A to Z, which isn't true. There is a part of, it's not magic because there is a reason, but which escapes the human brain. So yes, I'm all in favor of lawyers not being afraid of that and entering the magic themselves.
Great. I think we don't have any questions so far, so we're approaching almost an hour. Unless anyone else has any questions. Nicolas, Simon, there's one message here. Tanya, do you want to Shall I give you the floor, or do you want me to read your question? Well, Tania from Peru, unless she speaks, she, from the perspective of small market economies, emerging economies, how relevant is the resources availability and the political confidence in order to carry out the implementation of the computational instrumentals? I think we already touched this, but maybe you can add something else.
I mean, for the political parts, no idea. But okay, let me make a distinction between, you know, computational tools could be lots of different things. It could be the web scraping. This you could do using, you know, an add-on to Google Chrome or whatever you are using. You could do that very easily. When it comes to NLP, natural language processing, you could do it also online. There are lots of free tools where you could try yourself and see, and it's actually quite cool to see how it works. So in terms of the cost, it could actually be quite cheap. So this is a good point, right? When it comes to political issues, at least you won't have to convince people for lots of money, at least in the very beginning. But what I wanted to say is that if we are talking about AI, the distinction between supervised and unsupervised machine learning is very important. And when it comes to the supervised machine learning, you do need lots of data to be able to train to get to the right output. But this is changing, and this is something which is fascinating to me. If you read the MIT Tech Review, they will actually document in plain English language many new technologies coming out those days where you could actually train a machine learning with less and less data. And they call that zero point machine learning or something like that. So at the end of the day, it will become more and more accessible. And so I see no reason why, you know, developing countries will not be doing that. And in fact, when I've been discussing with the agencies, some of the agencies willing to use the tools right away and asking me, hey, which tool can I use right now? Because I have this case where very small agencies with just, you know, a handful of employees. So it might be helpful for different reasons. But yes, to some degree, I see no reason why only the big agencies will be using the tools and not the small agencies. This could actually be done when it comes to merge control, starting today or tomorrow, for just a couple of euro, dollars, or whatever the currency is. So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with your comments. And for example, the Promethean case that I mentioned, it was something done by the lawyers, obviously with some technicians and people specialized in computational tools, etc. But I mean, it was not an expensive tool. It was done in Buenos Aires with all the problems we have in Argentina. Honestly, that was also exported in a certain way, not only to the region, but also to the United Nations and some other. Actually, in California, they received an email saying, hey, we don't have this tool. We want it. I mean, and they were sending an email from maybe the place in the world to a place like Buenos Aires where you don't have sometimes those tools or those resources that Tania is mentioning. Yep. So I don't think it would be a question of resources, but mainly of political decision or willing to do things, or at least try to use these tools.
Because yes, and again, I mean, coming back to that idea, the tools overall could be shared very easily. It's a question of political will. However, the data, it might be very interesting, and I suspect, but this is, you know, long-term prediction, that competition law all over the world will converge because of the tools actually. And what they've tried to do in the second paper is to train the algorithm working with FTC decisions and DOJ decisions. And when they've done that, it wasn't working because the case law is too different for the algorithm to understand how it functions. So it means that you cannot train an algorithm based on the Argentina competition agency and try to say, hey, let's apply the same to Peru. This will not be working. And potentially, if we want that to be working, we need to, you know, converge the way by which we apply competition law. So it seems to me that, again, it could be quite cheap. And for now, it's all a matter of providing the right data. And the data that is accessible to all agencies is the case law they've been publishing in the past. And that is relevant data when it comes to understanding and detecting new patterns. So that, a handful of interns or junior associates could actually clean the data and translate the data and train the tool with just 1 or 2 computer scientists. So it's really nothing. If you want to start there, you could do that very easily.
Great. Yes, actually, that paper, Mazarotto, Anito, I think they finally concentrated more on FTC cases than on DOJ because of the reason you mentioned.
Yeah.
So I think, Thibault, we don't want to keep you more than an hour, as we said. Thank you again very much for joining us. I think there's a lot to still discuss. We can do it regionally with the Latin American countries, or we can also explore more the outcomes of your project, which we will definitely follow very, very actively from here. It will be very interesting to see how the agencies participate in your project. I mean, we've seen 54 agencies, I think, already signed up. It would be great to see the feedback you get from them and how things evolve on that side. I think that should be definitely something to follow.
And yes, and on that, we've been sending them the papers, and a few of them have been reacting and asking more questions. So I don't know what's happening there. Potentially they are trying to implement something, but we'll see. 3 of them have been publishing official statements to support the project: the DOJ, the Czech and the Slovakian competition agencies. So yes, we have some interest, but I cannot wait to be in December to do the workshop and to wait for the agencies to share and to react to all that. It's going to be the best part of the year when it comes to the project. I've put my email in the chat because, as you could see, it's a work in progress, to say the least. So any thoughts, Zoom you want to organize, I'll be delighted to. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to discuss all that. This was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thibault.
Thank you for joining us, and it's a commitment. We will definitely call you again for another experience at the IDC. And thank everybody to join us today. It was a pleasure again to have you all on board, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.